Welcome to the podcast of the Political Page blog with commentary from an attorney and entrepreneur on the political and social issues of the day, from a rationalist, libertarian, and often irreverent perspective. This is Political Page, and here's what's on my mind today. Hello and welcome to the podcast of the Political Page blog. This one is dated the 4th of August, 2019, and it is entitled Baltimore Rats and Federal Judges, Misdirection in the Age of Trump. You know, our reality television nation remains mesmerized by this urgent question this week. Which is more racist? Is it Trump noticing that the mostly black population of Baltimore is doomed to live in a Hunger Games cesspit of rats and drugs? Or is it Baltimore Representative Elijah Cummings noticing that the mostly black population of Baltimore is doomed to live in a Hunger Games cesspit of rats and drugs? The only difference between the twin comments is that one comes from Bad Orange Man and the other comes from a browner guy. Oh, and the fact that the browner guy has had a couple of decades in power to do something about his own district, but instead is elected to sit fat and happy in the Capitol eating peeled grapes and perfecting his scowl from the dais. The real question here is not the silliness of whether the same statement from two people is somehow racist from one of them just because. The question is why. When Donald Trump tosses chum into the political waters with a tweet, every single shark in the ocean swarms in to chomp wildly at the bait, rolling back their eyes and missing everything else in the sea. There can be no doubt at this point that Trump has got to do this intentionally. Because while the media and the progressives have swarmed, snapping and biting into successive buckets of bait, Trump has been quietly remaking America where it counts, and he does so mostly under the media radar. Well, how? Well, briefly, deregulation, take that for example. I mean, after promising to trim the federal Leviathan by removing 2 regulations for every one he puts in, which is, well, admittedly, that's kind of a meaningless metric. It's much more important what regulations are put in and out. But he's actually achieved a whopping 13-to-1 ratio. Instead, at that point, the metric actually starts to mean something. But what's the last time you read a headline about deregulation statistics? Not nearly as exciting as racism and rats. And then, of course, there's the restructuring of the tax code, right? It single-handedly resurrected American small business, and American small business employs about 2/3 of us. And the corollary to that one is the neat little trick of getting the highest workforce participation in history, coupled with nearly the lowest unemployment in history and rapidly rising wages, the exact opposite of Obama's claim that we had hit a new normal of tepid growth. When's the last time you read a headline about the record economy that wasn't followed by predictions of some experts that it's all going to crash probably next week? Meanwhile, there's the deep sixing of all those idiotic trade agreements. You can read about that in the blog. And despite headlines bewailing the imminent collapse of the global economy after every one of those agreements that he withdraws from, the press is remarkably restrained in reporting the subsequent success in renegotiating them. But hey, all of that is fleeting, isn't it? I mean, as the press is fond of reminding us, and sullen article after sullen article, much of this is going to change. The next time America forgets what malaise feels like and decides to elect another naive socialist idiot to run the largest capitalist economy on the planet, we'll be right back in the popper again. But meanwhile, we are treated to howling mob headlines over each successively bloody tidbit that Trump plops into the sea of the adversarial media. And perhaps this obsessive chumming of the cultural waters does obscure some of the successes of his administration. A lot of people say that. But, that concern assumes something. It assumes that the press is going to fairly cover those successes if they are deprived of all this vapid fodder. They wouldn't. What it does guarantee, for better or for worse, is that the truest legacy of the Trump administration has gone widely unnoticed, unreported, and pretty much unappreciated, for good or ill, by the American public. And I think this might be quite intentional. Because Donald Trump has changed the federal judiciary for a generation. And in the next week, eclipsed by stories about phantom racism and Maryland rats, he will likely pass a milestone of over 100 new federal district court originalist judges. Now look, whenever you talk about courts, what happens? The first thing, Roe v. Wade. Forget hot-button issues like Roe v. Wade. Now, granted, the decision admittedly created a nightmare line of cases in which the federal courts are now free to gleefully redraft the Constitution. But aside from that, understand this. The federal courts in general are out of control. and they have been for several decades. Once activist judges discovered they could just create law instead of interpreting it, the entire checks and balances structure of the United States Constitution was undermined, and it has brought the functioning of government to the edge of an abyss. Technically, a district court is only got an order that is effective within its territorial limits of the district, right? But we have obscure district court judges in places like San Francisco issuing nationwide injunctions, reversing statutes and orders that are clearly within the dictates of only legislative and executive branches. In short, what has been really happening under the radar is that progressive judges are engaging in a soft coup against our constitutional form of government. In fact, activist judges have issued more national injunctions in the Trump administration than the last 40 presidents combined. Now, these are seldom upheld when they get to the higher courts, but it takes forever. The delay in both the application of laws and orders has wreaked havoc upon the functioning of the federal system. And believe it or not, underneath the notice of most people in this country, it's almost brought the system to its knees. We have social justice warriors hawking laws that the legislature never intended and never passed. We have obscure district court peons wiping out entire national executive mandates on the border security with a stroke of their pink-tinged pens. And listen, the plodding Supreme Court, under the very nervous leadership of Chief Justice Roberts, has been tepid in pulling back the excesses. They do pull it back, but they limit the decision to the facts of the case. There are some increasingly adamant concurrences and dissents where the conservative justices are saying you cannot allow these district courts to do national orders, but so far the Supremes have kind of been hesitant to do it. Attorney General Barr and Vice President Pence have just joined in requesting that the Supreme Court clarify the issue. I think they did that in May of this year. We'll see what happens. But look, the broader issue is this. Do the federal courts have the authority to create law and remedies in order to further their private views of social justice? Or are the courts restricted to interpreting the Constitution and the statutes that are passed by the legislature elected by the people? The former view, that they have an activist role, is favored by progressives. Why? Because they consistently fail to get their more extreme policies imposed through the electoral process and legislation. The latter view, that they are restricted to simply interpreting what the legislature does, that's called the Originalist Theory because it comes from the founders' original intention for the courts. It preserves policymaking to the elected government officials, not the unelected judiciary. Now, frankly, the progressives find the entire Constitution outdated and insufficient because it refuses to usher in their new socialist utopia through the electoral system. Now, the only way to address this is to nip it at the shadowy district court muck from whence it arises. Asking the Supreme Court to end the clearly extra-constitutional issuance of national injunctions or whatever is a good step, as is the appointment of originalist Supreme Court justices. But did you know the massive workload of the federal court system has nothing to do with the Supreme Court? To restrain the federal judiciary, the key is to work from the foundation up. And that's precisely what Donald Trump is very quietly doing. The Supreme Court takes about 5,000 cases a year. Most of those are addressed by one sentence saying they're declining to hear the case. Meanwhile, go down a level. The Circuit Court of Appeals gets 40,000 cases. Not 5,000, 40,000. And the district courts, they decide over 225,000 cases every year. The real power of the federal courts isn't what happens at the shiny level of the Supreme Court, but with the workaholic districts. And the only effective way to restrain those 225,000 decisions to within constitutional bounds is to restock the federal judiciary from the bottom up. And to that end, a single election promise made by Donald Trump is quite possibly the saving grace of our entire constitutional structure, that he would appoint originalist judges through the recommendation of the Federalist Society. You can look it up. It's a great society. His stubborn adherence to that promise, together with the political machinations of that master of the Senate, Mitch McConnell, have created a tsunami of change at the foundation of our judiciary. It's not a boring subject. It's critical. With the appointments of Gorsuch and Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court, Trump did make some headway at the top. And those nominations garner massive press coverage, right? We get the hearings, we get all the gossip, we get everything. But what's really reshaping the federal judiciary is the rest of the court system. And in 2 years, Trump has nominated and had confirmed a bizarre number of judges to those lower federal courts. In just 2 short years, 43 judges nominated by Trump have been confirmed to the United States Circuit Courts of Appeal. That's the level immediately below the Supreme Court, the ones that get about 20,000 cases a year. But even more important is that at this point, a staggering 99 district court judges have been confirmed at the next level down. That's as of August 1st. Believe me, it changes daily. As of August 1st, on top of those 99 judges, another 22 of them are out of committee and up for automatic approval, and 12 more are moving through committees. He's going to pass 100 district court judges in a day or so. Now, you're not going to see many headlines about the new confirmation of a district court of appeal judge. You won't even see many headlines that Trump has passed 100 of them, even though that reflects the reshaping of the American justice system for a generation. It doesn't make for exciting headlines to gin up that Democrat base, does it? Let's hope they keep talking about rats. Thank you for tuning in to the Political Page podcast today. Original blog articles, complete with a lot more information and great links to original source material, can be found anytime on politicalpage.net. That's political, P-A-I-G-E.net.